Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the SD.RB podcast. Today Kevin Clark is going to be giving a brief overview of both Access Authenticated as well as RESTful authentication.
Okay, so whenever everyone is ready, we can get started. So I've just created a blank Rails structure. I did create one controller, or post controller, and we've got two actions, one that should be accessible to everyone and one that should be members only. So at the moment, if we go ahead and start up our server. I'm sorry? I'm going to show the RESTful in a second. This is vanilla Access Authenticated. I have already installed the plugin, so it doesn't take really a long time. The only line you missed was the script plugin install. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So right now, we can get into the members only section. We can get into the accessible section. Shouldn't really be able to happen yet. So I have done the script plugin install already. But we'll go ahead and look at the README real quick. Because it basically instructs you completely on what to do with it. So this is a basic. Let me get the text bumped up for the podcast. What's the quick key? Plus. Okay, so basically all we do is generate our user. We generate our authenticated generator, which creates a user model and an account controller for us to handle everything else. So they also have other generators built in. Authenticated mailer is one, and I think authenticated migration is still in. We'll see that in a moment. So if we copy this line, script generate user account, it goes ahead and we see it creates. It did it for me, Jordan. It creates our user migration now, apparently. It creates an account controller, it creates our user and the tests associated with it, and all of those things out of the box. So now, we have a user model, which has all of this stuff in here already. It deals with all of your authentication. In fact, several people I've worked with like to create a user base model that all this goes into, and then inherit from that so it doesn't muddy up their model files. But everything's here. We've got authentication, encryption, remembering cookies, all that's already built in. You don't have to worry about it. The one thing you do need to worry about is in our account controller, it prompts you to, if you want remember me functionality, add this before filter to your application controller. Now this is actually new, so that you can add cookies in. I've found that if you want to disable cookies, there's an option for that. But it makes the most sense to put this before filter in the application controller anyway. So we're just going to copy all of this over into application controller. And what this does is drop in the login required method into all of our controllers. So you can say my before filter is that login is required on these actions. So there we're in application controller, and account controller is cleaned up. The one other thing you're going to want to do if you're testing is in your test helper, you're going to want to include, I think it shows this in the tests already. Let's take a look real quick in account test. So if you see this, they've got another comment. Be sure to include authenticated test helper in your test helper. And that lets you do things like there's two assertions, login required and login not required, or something like that are included and you can use in your other controllers. So we're going to go ahead and add this in our test helper in case we had any tests. So that's the entirety of the setup. Now to use it, all we need to do is go into our post controller and tell it where our login is required. So our before filter is login is required, and by default before filters affect everything. So I think I need to bump my server because we added new models, and I may have bumped the server anyway. I don't think it's not running. Okay, so we do Mongo Rails start I'm using Mongrel because it's just way faster than WebBrick. It's really nice to work with. So we have a syntax error because I typed something I shouldn't have. But we'll clear that up real quick. Account controller 2. Yeah, I inserted some Unicode that shouldn't be there. So if we try this again, it redirects us to this login page because we've required login for everything. Now let's go ahead and take it off for our accessible. I'm sorry, this is host control. For our accessible action, because everybody should be able to get to that. So we can say only members only, or except, in this case, since it's only one, and probably other things we'll want to restrict, we'll just say except accessible. Now, if we wanted to do, if you haven't used before filters, if you wanted to, you could also pass an array and list all of the different methods for except or only. But in this case, we just want to restrict access to members only. So if we go to accessible, if I spell it right, post. Now we can see it. But if we go to members only, it redirects us to login. Other methods that come bundled with login are sign up, unless they've changed that. Oh, you know what it is? I haven't run my migrations, so it can't instantiate a user model. So let's go ahead and do that as long as we're here. So rake migrate goes ahead and creates our user table. Then we can start the server back up, and we have sign up. So user authentication in 5 minutes or less, if you know where you're going with it. Access authentication. Access Authenticated always really gets out of your way, so it's definitely my favorite authentication plugin. I think it's the way to go. One of the new alternatives to this, Rick just released a plugin called, I think he's calling it RESTful Authentication. And I've created another quick structure for this, same setup. But I haven't installed Simply RESTful, so I'm really just going to show you the code. It generates, what it does differently is instead of generating an accounts controller, it generates a sessions controller, which is where logins and logouts happen. I think login is mapped to session create, logout is mapped to session destroy. Signing up is actually mapped to users new. So it's using those RESTful verbs. So once things map over, if you're just looking at let me bump up my font and just type out some examples. So I don't know how many of you have used Simply RESTful, but the idea is that it's using the four main HTTP verbs: get, post, put, and destroy, or delete. Delete. And it maps those to your normal Rails actions. So get automatic. So let's say we just look at users. This maps to get, or this is going to be a get because it's on our web browser. But this maps to index. Users 1 would map to show, or our show action. For our older URLs, this would map to user show 1. And then it's got other things for mapping. So the idea is, let me generate the code and we will see it. So the idea is that you're always creating something or listing something or updating something. And so the session is when you log in, you're creating a new session, and when you log out, you're destroying a new session. And it really just splits up the already existing Access Authenticated code to accept that. The one violation to the REST idea of independent gets is that you can reach, is if you're writing your own routes and you want to have a link for log out, you're breaking REST. But everything else works out. So let's see what generates real quick. I don't remember the the line. It's actually exactly the same as before, except you're going to want to call your controller sessions because that's what you're working with. So we script generate authenticated user sessions. We see all of these pop up. So you can see we get a session controller and a user's controller so that we can create a new user and instantiate sessions with login and logout. And then basically everything else is the same. I think the README goes into it, and Rick's website also does, techno-weenie.net. But if we look at our sessions controller, we can see that create. Here's our create, and this is login. So this is where it checks that you can authenticate and see if you're already logged in, and destroy is where you've been logged out. And then on the user side, you get this new method, which is the sign-up form, and create, which actually creates a new user. So that's where sign-up is. So if you were mapping your own routes and you wanted to make /signup go to the sign-up page, you'd want it to go to the create action on the user's controller. So that's RESTful authentication. I'm still not completely sold on REST for everything. But if you want to do it, here's what.
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.